How are you guys? Welcome back to Wargaming China, the channel where I platform my understandings of the Sino-Japanese War mainly for the wargamer, scratch builder, modeler, and armchair historian. So today I'm going to be chatting about something that's probably going to get a bit heavy and a bit long, so if you're going to get bored, go now, or if if you've got the time, you may as well get yourself a drink, because today's subject is going to be quite a long one, and I'm going to explain what I'm doing. Okay, in early April 1935, the United States Army issued an intelligence report and a table of strength of the Chinese Army. Now, this table of organization, table of strength, is sooner or later, if you're looking into China's war of resistance from 1931 to 1945, you're going to come across that table. Now, I've always been looking at it on and off, and it was one of the big bases for understanding China's war. The table is like a lot of things. The more you look at it, the more you examine it, the more it can tell you, or the more questions it gives you to ask, and then they'll tell you. So when the Americans issued their intelligence report, they titled it Strength for the Chinese Army. And they classified the forces in China as loyal to Chiang, semi-loyal to Chiang, and independent. However, there is a fourth table they probably should have added, which is rogue. Okay, so I'm going to walk you through the Chinese Army now. Now, most books will use this table of contents to build on and take you through the changes of the Chinese Army up until 1937 and the official beginning of hostilities. However, I'm going to use the table to introduce the circumstances up until 1935. And I'm going to try to explain the armies, their loyalties, and indeed, as I said, this report was published in April 1935. But by the end of April, May, and onward, right until 1937, changes to the loyalty, semi-loyalty, independent or rogue status of armies will change. Now, we'll start off with 1 3/4 million troops loyal to Chiang in 1935. Now, I'm lucky. I've used various figures from my various Chinese armies, and I've put them out as one standing figure equals 10,000 men, one kneeling figure equals 5,000, and one prone figure equals 1,000. So, if we go over to look at the loyal troops. Okay. First off, we've got the CKS Changsha divisions loyal to the Chinese Army, part of the NRA, but not organised or reorganised to a German level. Now, forces like this would include forces of the Ma family, Ma Bufang, Ma Zhongyin, and forces from provinces such as Qinghai, Ninhai, and the border provinces of around the border counties around the Tibetan border, Tibetan and Soviet border. As far as these organizations are concerned, there are some awesome formations and good solid formations found among them, but there are also some very poorly equipped and poorly led forces in those organizations. Now, if we look at what we call a loyal Chinese army, we've got to go back to the Northern Expedition. Okay, and then when we go to the back to the Northern Expedition, that is Chiang's drive to reunify China and get rid of the warlords. His drive north through Manchuria and to the old marshals, and to get rid of the old marshals' forces. Now, that was a successful war, and it led to Chiang Kai-shek saying, "I've reunified China," and it also led to a great expanse in his own armies. Now, the Northern Expedition wasn't the end of this, however, because a couple of years later we get the Central Plains Wars. Now, the Central Plains Wars were a last-ditch effort to, it was another power grab by another group in China, and that group was mainly now be seen as central government troops. These are former Yang Zhujiang troops. Okay, so they are the troops of the Christian general, Christian warlord. Now, he was a big player in the Plains War, and he lost out big time. So by 1935, Feng Yuxiang's troops are firmly under government control, and they are participating in encirclement campaigns in I think it's Guangdong province. Now, in 1933, Feng Yuxiang will raise his own anti-Japanese volunteer army of 100,000 and enter the fight against the Japanese as a renegade rogue general. But perhaps I'm getting ahead of myself. So I explained how the Central Plains War, the Northern Expedition of the Central Plains War, would cement Chiang's forces and his personal command. That would also end with former troops of his enemies, but not all of them. This is complicated, so you have to stick with me. I'm not the world's best communicator. Okay. So if we look next at central government troops and what's loyal, we look at the former Northeast Army. So the Northeast Army is the Young Marshals Army. That was the first video that, if you look at the videos, there's a video on the Northeast Army. Now that is the Young Marshals Forces, and the Young Marshals Forces will be engaging again the Reds from 1935, from 34-35 onwards in and around Shanxi and Guangdong provinces. You know what? I shouldn't say where they are campaigning, but they are campaigning, and because I get the names all confused. Okay, but the Northeastern Army is campaigning under the Young Marshals command against the Reds. Now, I got to say here that there are. So this is 1935. So in 1935, having lost his provinces of Manchuria, the former Northeastern armies are now central government troops, and they are being sent to fight the communists, who are in the middle of their long march. Now, I don't want to get ahead of myself. So then we look at the former provincial troops. So former provincial troops by 1935 would be, some would be the armies of defeated warlords, like the dog-meat general who was disgraced and executed for cowardice. and some would be intact formations of minor warlords like General Song of the 29th Army. Now, so that is what we could consider as loyal to Chiang in 1935. So I'll go through that again. We have provincial governors' armies of various provinces who will be part of the CKS unreorganized divisions. Then we have Chiang Kai-shek's, what he would have reorganized and probably were under his personal command. Then we have central government forces, so I says former provincial troops, the Young Marshal's Army, the Christian Generals former army. Then we're going to move to the semi-loyal. Now, when we look at the semi-loyal, we have to think. When we look at the semi-loyal, we can see forces that would have participated in Central Plains War, but are still autonomous and independent. So we look at Guizhou and Shanxi. And I've got to tell you, when you look at these, the warlords for these provinces, that the long march, the communist long march, the retreat of the communists in 3 columns, it's a deciding factor on how these warlords play their cards. Will very much decide how this table changes from semi-loyal to central government. And I'll try to go through it. So in Shanxi, we have the model governor. Okay, now his right-hand man in Sui Yuan is Fu Zuoyi. Now, the model governor runs a very good province. His arms factory is probably the best in China. From Sui Yuan, his right-hand man, Fu Zuoyi, is developing like what could just be considered the Wild West of China at the time. And even though he backs the wrong side in the Central Plains War, he is such a good administrator and political maneuverer that he's back in charge of Shanxi province by 1935. Now today I'm only going to talk basically from 1928 to April 1935, and then after that I'll do a part 2. So through very shrewd negotiating and just being through a very efficient, like I said, his nickname was the model governor, and because of that, he was able to get back into power in Shanxi just basically by walking in. You know, his power, he must have had a hell of a charisma or whatever, but there you go. Yan Zai-shan. Now, then we'd have to go to Sichuan. And Sichuan's, it's a very poor province, but it's got a lot of people, okay? And it's got a clique. And that's a clique of warlords. So in Sichuan, say that the most powerful warlord would be Lu Xiang. And Len Wenhui in Zaikan is doing what Fu Zuoyi is doing in Suiyang. He's extending into the borderland, into the into Inner Mongolia basically, and there's only one thing in Inner Mongolia before the arrival of these warlords, of these proteges, and that's bandits and grasslands. So when we look at Sichuan, we have to understand that Liu Xiang is a very forward-thinking commander. He's and his army, the Sichuan army, is just so gone with contradictions. I mean, so many sources will tell you that the Sichuan army was a two-gun army. That means one rifle in the hand and an opium pipe in the belt. 2 guns. But this isn't always the case. The 21st Army, which is Sichuanese army, was a very good army. And not only that, but Sichuan was Liu Xiang was like an innovator of his forces. He was one of the first ones to try to create an armoured corps. Of course, with his resources available, he didn't get too far. But I have built one of the armoured cars that his forces would field. So yeah, up until 1935, with the arrival of the communists, both Liu Xiang, Yan Zhishan, all of these warlords are very wary about who's their bigger enemy. The communists who are retreating, Chiang, who is maneuvering his forces all the time, politically and militarily, to oust and get rid of warlords, or is it the Japanese in the long run? So all of these 2 warlords, they will have to make some very, very, very impressive choices in the coming time. But over the years, from 31 to 35, they would have to make some very good choices. Now, which moves us to Guizhou. Now, Wang Jiali was a dedicated anti-communist. And even if you read Communists Against the Long March, they had a lot of respect for the troops of Guizhou. Now, saying that again, I have heard incidents of the troops of Guizhou referred to as a two silver dollar army, which means that the troops would say, for $1 silver we'll fight for an hour, for $2 silver we'll fight for 2 hours. So there you go. The Guizhou army is as I said, I'll get to beyond April 1935 in the next one, but up until this point, up to 1935, we're just going to do. Now, in Yunnan, we've got Long Yun, the king of Yunnan. Now, the king of Yunnan is a road builder, he's a border builder, he's progressive. A lot of Westerners referred to that Yunnan is the only democratic province in China, or was the only democratic province in China. And Long Yun is very smart. Although he's only got a very small army, it is extremely well trained and extremely well equipped. It was only several years before, I think it was 1928, before he had to close his military academy, which was schooled and officered by French instructors. So his army is very competent, and he's got the money. Yunnan, Sichuan, around Chongqing, where Liu Xiang is a trade hub. Yunnan's got its own borders. It can do what it wants with. It's going to find it easier to bring weapons in and. Look, like I said, Long Yun's a real smart player with his road building, and long term, we're gonna, it's not going to be the last we'll hear of Long Yun and his very professional Yunnan army. Now, we'll go to the independent. Whoops. We'll go to the independent. Right. So, in the independence, we've got Guangdong and Chen Jitang. We've got Guangxi and Lai Zonggren, and we've got Xinjiang and Shen Shikai. Now, as I said, I'm going to take back events up until early April 1935. Guangdong, Chen Jitang seems to be able to import arms somehow. I mean, it's pretty obvious he's got open borders. He can import things through Hong Kong. He's a good administrator, a good governor. I think his nickname was the Southern Sun King. Guangdong was in the golden age under him. And when the Red Army came through, he played his cards right. Even though the government were going to send forces in to chase the Red Guard into Guangdong, he seemed to play his cards very well. But Chen Jitang will overplay his cards very soon after the end, in a time frame. But this is only up until April 35. Now in Guangxi, Lai Zonggren, Bai Zhongxi and Huang Shaohang form the new Guangxi clique. And let me tell you, these guys, even though they've got a small army, small combined forces, they are not to be trifled with. Lai Zonggren is a brilliant military commander. Was a brilliant military commander. Responsible for the first major defeat of the Japanese at Taizhuang. That's Lai-Gren. You can't give anybody else credit for that battle either. But I mean, his offsider, Bai Zhongxi, Bai Zhongxi is very hard to find. He was of the Muslim faith and rabid anti-communist. He's mainly the one responsible for what was called the Shanghai Massacre, where tens of thousands of communists were executed and rounded up and killed in Shanghai in 1920, I think it was 28. So, saying that, come on, he seems to have been a very charming man, and Bai Zhongxi, by all accounts, as I said, was another good commander. He was in charge of the forces for the first defense of Changsha, which was a military success for the Chinese. So the only Huang Shaohang, who commanded the 15th Army, means perhaps his stars didn't shine as bright as Lai Zonggren and Bai Zhongxi, but certainly a competent, able commander. And again, this was a time of economic and educational growth in Guangxi. Now we come to Xinjiang. Now Xinjiang is a very interesting place in Chinese history because if you're commander of Xinjiang, all you're ever expected to do, traditionally, is guard the borders, put down any independence movements, no matter what religion they may be, and never proclaim yourself independent. And if you do that, whatever government was in China, whether it be an imperial government or the KMT, they let you do what the hell you wanted, because Xinjiang was a lawless place. We've got to remember that in China at this time, once you got 2 miles out of any town, it was lawless. There's extreme banditry. There's only a few provinces like Guangdong and Shanxi where there's no banditry. or very little. Yunnan also is pretty. The roads are pretty safe, but even under central government, they're not. But let's get back to Chiang Kai, and this guy is the hardest of all of the commanders and the government to understand, because he's playing silly buggers for years. Now I'll explain that. Now, Chiang Kai is a member of the KMT and an officer of the National Revolutionary Army, and he has been officially endorsed as ruler of Xinjiang province. However, he is extremely anti-red. Sorry, he starts off as being extremely pro-red, and say by 1934, he has ingratiated himself with the Soviet along the border so much that he's signing mining rights with the Soviets, where everything's going to Soviets and the Soviets way. What he's trying to do is get Xinjiang declared as an independent state and recognized by the Soviet Union. And the Soviet Union just about do everything but that. And this is very, very annoying for Chiang. And I'll give you an example of how annoying it is for Chiang. When he becomes governor in 1934, Chiang immediately appoints Ma Zhongyin as the commander of the Xinjiang military forces. Now, Ma Zhongyin is one of Chiang Kai's greatest adversaries. And indeed, the situation will escalate to such an extent that the Soviets will invade Xinjiang province in support of Chiang Kai's forces in 1934. However, the forces of Ma family forces, I think it's Ma Zhongyin, at the Battle of Dawanchang, halts the Soviet advance completely. So, as I said, the Soviets are relieved because a force of white Russians comes up from behind the Ma forces, but the situation in Xinjiang province is very, very confusing, and you've got to remember too that there are lots of uprisings and rebellions being put down in and around Xinjiang. I'll give you another example. The city of Umriki is captured and recaptured 4 times in the space of a year and a half by Ma family divisions of the Ma family, and NRA divisions of the Ma family, fighting Xinjiang's Chiang Kai's forces. So Chiang Kai is really pushing. He's so pro-Soviet, it's unbelievable. But the Soviets will do anything but recognize independence. Now, the situation got out of hand because by 1938, the Soviet Union is sending military supplies to China. And on the way to Luzhou, they have to pass through Xinjiang. So the Soviets basically occupy most of a corridor up until Kumul. And because the nationalists don't want, China doesn't want to obviously fight, provoke the Soviets by having his own forces try to shift them out of their illegal occupation. He turns a blind eye to this. And this also helps Chiang Kai consolidate his position even more. But come to German invasion of the Soviet Union. Within 2 months of the German invasion of the Soviet Union, there's no more Soviet supplies coming to China. There is some technical assistance, but even the forces that are there don't seem to be reinforced. And this is unfortunate because within 3 months of Germany invading Russia, Chen Shikai, the leader of Xinjiang, has suddenly become staunchly anti-communist. But hey, I'm supposed to stop at 1935, so there we go. In 1934 he invited the Soviets in, and the Soviets invaded Xinjiang province in order to back Chen Shikai up in his struggle with Ma forces. So then we come to the anti-Japanese, the Rogue. And then we come to the Rogue. Now what's the Rogue? The Rogue is the anti-Japanese volunteer armies. Now, by about 1935, the anti-Japanese volunteer armies were down to about 30,000 men. But as I said before, Feng Yuxiang in 1933 had his own anti-Japanese volunteer army of 100,000. Now these forces of the anti-Japanese volunteer armies, as I said, they are always looked on legally and in the eyes of Chiang as renegade troops of the Chinese army. And the volunteers themselves are renegade citizens of China as they are disobeying a treaty. Now, then we've got to look at the Red Army. Now, the long retreat started in August 1934 and ended in October 1935. Now, the long retreat, as I said, we're going to see in the next episode how it changes the power structure. And we'll see how the end of the Long March. Now, the Long March, as I said, took just over a year. And it was because around about 1932-33, the Chinese Communist forces had 4 very large Soviets in China. One around Guangdong, Jiangxi, Fujian border. One in Hunan, one in Sichuan, and one in Shanxi. Now, by 1933, the communists in these, the communist forces in these Soviets, these very large Soviets, had probably up to 300,000 and soldiers and more civilians. And they had been very successful in their guerrilla campaigns against the forces of Chiang Kai-shek and various warlords. Now, it's at this point Otto Braun, a German advisor, because it wasn't only the nationalists who had German advisors. Otto Braun had said that the Chinese communist forces should go on the offensive and into open warfare. And Mao didn't agree, but was the leader of the Communist Party at that time, was overruled. And the Communist Army went over to conventional warfare, which was very welcoming to the nationalists, because outside of Nanchang, on I can't remember the date, but yeah, the communists lost 80,000 within the first few days of their offensive, and then they decided to retreat with their nationalists on their tails. Now, by April 1935, as I said, the long retreat is on, but probably if we look at by April 1935, the long retreat is, you know, in I'm just talking here in Shanxi province. In Shanxi province, where the final Soviet would be. By April 1935, Soviet forces would probably, communist forces, communist Red People's Army, probably equal to about 25,000. Now then, if we look at the anti-Japanese volunteer armies and the CCP, we will see that in Manchuria, Chiang's not having much control at all. And he believes, and many historians will tell you, that the anti-Japanese volunteer armies eventually would be so much on the tit or infiltrated by the Chinese Communist Army that Chiang no longer trusts them. Now, all of this time, you've got to remember that in September 1931, the Mukden incident happened. Okay, so that's an act of Japanese aggression against China, and the fall of Manchuria will follow, and that state of Manchuria will raise, and the Japanese will raise and foster puppet armies and quasi and independence armies, and this is not a period from 1931 to 1935. Is not a period where Chiang, as a Chinese leader, wants a war, and indeed it's not a period where the Japanese government want a war. It's a period where the Guangdong army want to have conquest. It's a period where the Japanese military forces are just getting more and more insubordinate, not obeying orders. They're getting more control in parliament, and just like military commanders on the ground are saying, we're not at war, we're not at war. This was us doing security operations, and then the government said, oh, this is us doing security operations. And the Chinese, who were weak, aren't arguing. They're not in a position to argue, because why? Why is Chiang pursuing the communists? Because the communists would retreat, and the way Chiang can handle his forces and move them around would eliminate the semi-loyals and the independents and make them under his command. So Chiang isn't just trying to destroy the communists out of some ideological factor. Yeah, I mean, I'm not saying he isn't, but there's more than that. Destroying the communists, or the drive to destroy the communists, is his way to intrigue and entice and foment trouble with the semi-loyal and independent forces within China that he wants to fully control. Now, that's part one for that, and this is the stage of China that I will always think of now as September 31 to April 35 to the Battle of Shanghai, 37, is war with deniability. And it's because of this deniability that historians still say, oh, Sino-Japanese War starts 1937. So next time, what I'm going to do is we're going to look at all these armies again, but from April 1935, and we'll look how they shift and grow, and their forces grow, and their allegiances change. Well, I hope that wasn't too heavy. I hope I made sense of it. It was a very complex subject, but I always wanted to get into it with you because, it's very hard to put names to faces and, deeds and actions. And so I hope that helped generally your understanding of war games. I hope you like seeing all my little different figures that I have to represent these armies, and I hope you subscribe and press like. Okay, see ya, bye.